Welcome to the groundbreaking news program that delves into the heart of Mormonism, your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you are tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold. Did I do that right?
Yes, Brad, I think you did get it right. I'm not going to guess how many takes it took, but yeah, that's kind of a disturbing intro. I don't know if we want to, I think you triggered a lot of people in the comments. I'm kind of reading. So anyway, welcome everybody to the Mormon Newscast. It is Monday. It's December 23rd. We've got 2 days until Christmas. This is just crazy. I'm Rebecca Biblioteca. I am joined by my very festive co-anchors, RFM. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for noticing, Rebecca. You look absolutely smashing. Are you going out someplace fancy after the show?
I'm not going anywhere. No, I'm not doing a dang thing. I just dress up for you guys and for our listeners and our viewers.
Well, it was either that or I thought maybe you had a recital.
No, I have no recital. Although I do understand that President Nelson gave a little recital this month with a greeting card where he played Silent Night. Have you seen that, Bill? And how are you this evening?
I'm doing great, and I just saw it recently, and there's not a whole lot of footage of his hands. I'm hopeful that he learned how to play piano, and maybe he did, but the look on his face looked like at some points he was a little curious what environment he might even be in. So I don't know.
Well, he does like to share his talents. We've seen him vacuum. Remember that from a couple of years ago? Yeah, vacuuming, piano playing. It's all good. All good. All right, let's pull up our slides. We have an action-packed. Yes, RFM.
Yes, I have a new drinking mug.
Oh, was that a Christmas present from a viewer?
Whoa. Hey, there. And I don't know if you can see that there. It says, to quote Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 3, line 92, no. That's what it says.
No.
Yes, from my boss and longtime friend, Mr. Real.
Oh.
I also got Radio Free Mormon, a book of Shakespeare insults. I
have it right to hand.
I'm sure you'll use those.
It has, the one that I think probably leads the list in all of these collections, right? I do desire we may be better strangers.
I love that. I'm going to use that over the holidays. I think a lot of our viewers can, right? I do desire that we be better strangers. I like that. Which play is that from?
I think it said As You Like It.
I love As You Like It. That's perfect. All right, let's pull up our slides and let's get started. We have a lot of fun Christmassy news. And your thumbnail is incredible this time, Bill. I just love that. You get better and better every time. Excellent.
As opposed to last time, apparently.
No. They're getting better incrementally. I'm just saying this one, he's outdone himself for the holiday.
Yeah. Well, Merry Smithmas to both of you.
That's right.
Thank you. Merry Smithmas to you and yours.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. The newscast actually is falling on the birthday of Joseph Smith. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. He would be 219 years old had he still been alive.
Smithmas, everyone.
That's right. That's right. Merry Smithmas. All right. We're going to talk about tonight less respect for LDS female leaders, ? Polygamy stories for tots, the fallout begins, and RFM is going to cover that. New LDS hymns say what about LDS theology, and that's going to be Bill's story. And then I'm going to cover a little short story about please come back to church. I think maybe a lot of us have stories like that this time of year. And also looking like Jesus can pay off big time. So, all right, we'll start off with me. And for some reason, I don't know why I now can't move the slides. Bill, did we go to a different format or something?
Nope, you should be able to do it. So
yeah, I cannot, and I could right before the show.
You're logged in. You're logged in.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, no, I did before the show. That's what I'm saying. I think something might have changed. I don't know. I'm going to have you do it.
Present slides. Google Slides. Let's try this again.
It's always something on the newscast. We're just basically hacks. No, okay, I am. Bill's not. RFM semi, maybe.
So it just takes a second to process.
By the way, this tie of mine, which I don't get to wear too often.
Very nice.
Spider-Man.
Ooh, very nice.
Got a Santa hat on, and he's instead of reindeer, he's got the Hulk there.
All right, so strange, still not there. I'm going to have to ask you to switch it. Okay, go to my first slide. Again, we're talking about Happy birthday, Joseph Smith, 219 years old. There's a picture of the Relief Society, and they have a cake and some presents, some hats and a balloon. And there's Joseph Smith looking very birthday-like. If we go to our next slide really quick, I thought this was interesting. I don't know if everybody is aware of this story, and I called it "You Make the Call." And this has to
By the way, Rebecca, Emma doesn't know it, but some of those ladies got an extra little something for Joseph underneath the tree. Just FYI.
Yeah, we all know what happens on birthdays, and exactly, he's married to half those women in the Relief Society. So I'll let you use your imagination on that.
What happens on birthdays, Rebecca?
Oh, RFM.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, no one does. I have no idea either. Let's move on. You make the call, and that's CAUL. So I don't know if a lot of people realize, but Joseph Smith reportedly was born, it's called in the veil or in the call, meaning that the amniotic sac was still around him. So we had, kind of this film around him. This is a very magical thing. And the point is that he was set apart to be a seer from the very beginning. It says associates of the Smith family in Vermont and New York said that the Smiths spoke to Joseph Jr. as if he was the chosen son. Smith had a number of traits that would set him apart in folk culture. The Green Mountain Boys from Vermont, in a letter to Thomas Sharp of the Warsaw Signal, said the Smiths said that Joseph Jr. was born with a veil, exactly like this picture shows here, which meant he was born with a call. Being born with a call set children apart in European folk culture, often meaning that the child was a seer. So right out of the gate, his family believed that he was a seer. The Green Mountain Boys seem to link that claim to Joseph Sr.'s desire. And this supposedly Joseph Sr. said this, we want to find a stone for Joseph by which he can see all over the world. So from the very beginning, they thought he would be special and he would be a seer. And this suggests that the call and the seeing stone were linked. Now, a call, they would save this if a baby was born with this. You could sell it. I know that like sailors would buy it. Apparently, you could not drown if you had a piece of a call. And anybody who was a seer, a fortune teller, that was something they would say. I was born with the veil, meaning that they had this special abilities. So supposedly, some people said that the Smith family claimed this was Joseph. If we go to the next slide, the other special thing about Joseph is that Joseph Jr. was named for his father, even though he was the third son. The Smiths tended to name the third sons and the third daughters after the parents. Seventh sons were typically, that was, the special magical number. But in the Smith family, it was the third and the fifth son, and the daughters were also important. So here he has a call. He is the third son named after the father. And if we go to the next one, this has to do with our holiday. Another,
Rebecca, if I could just mention, I don't know that I've heard those sources before necessarily that you mentioned.
Yeah, you haven't heard of the Green Mountain Boys, and you haven't heard of the letter written to the Warsaw Signal. It was actually meant to discredit, of course, the Smith family, saying that they were magical, superstitious kind of a thing. But if you go back,
I was just going to say that where I did hear about it was in Orson Scott Card's book, Seventh Son.
Oh,
interesting.
In I had read that, but had not remembered. It's also mentioned in Michael Quinn and the Magical World. Yeah. So it's definitely out there, different places. And I cited it in the first slide. So the second thing, or the third thing that made him kind of magical, and this is what has to do with our holiday, another trait that set children apart in European folk culture was being born near Christmas. Smith was born today, 219 years ago, on December 23rd. And European folk culture referred to this as Christmas children, and they were said to have seeric abilities. So simply being born close to Christ's, reported birthday make them special. So Smith definitely had the two traits. He was born near Christmas time, and he was the third born son, and he could have possibly been born with a call. So if he did have all three, this made him absolutely destined to be something special. And I think his family probably treated him that way his entire life, kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I have to laugh because I think it was, which one of you guys was it? Or was it Ron Jorgensen? I can't remember, pointed out that December 23rd is also Emma Smith's second wedding anniversary for her second marriage. Because I don't know if a lot of you know that either. When she married her next husband, she chose Joseph Smith's birthday. You can interpret that the way you want. which I thought was funny. Yep, there it is, Orson Scott Card. Okay, so that was just a little
Great
side
find.
note. And I did have to say, if anybody wants to celebrate Joseph Smith's birthday, I kind of thought of some old-fashioned party games that, I played as a kid. They kind of, with this in mind, you could play hide and seek the golden plates, right? I mean, that happened a lot. You could play pin the tail on Martin Harris's deer. That's a good one. Martin Harris claimed to have walked with Jesus in the form of a deer. Musical wives. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Joseph Says. That's kind of a twist on Simon Says, right? Joseph Says. You could play I Spy with my little stone. That's a good one. And whoever added that, I did not, but I'm going to read it. Hide the salami. I'm guessing it was RFM.
A little Christmas surprise for you, Rebecca.
Yeah, we all have access to these slides. And, once we put them in, anybody can just add whatever they want. So take that.
By the way, for the people who are listening at home and not viewing this, the phrase that she's mentioning that she's denying now that she added to the slide,
I would never
hide the salami.
Yeah, I would never do that because it's not really a Christmas pun, is it? So, all right.
Look,
that was a
if
little
you don't
slide.
review all the slides immediately before the show goes live, I don't think it's my
it's my own fault. But who frankly has time for that? Honestly, who has time? I can't even advance the slides, let alone review them. So, okay. So any more thoughts about Mary Smithmas? And then we'll move to my first story, which is short.
I think I've already said everything I had to say about it.
I think you have. I think you've done plenty.
All
right. So our first story starts out with the Young Men's General Presidency. You can see them standing there, and they put out a little announcement about an upcoming fireside devotional. It's going to be live streamed in January for all of the young women and all of the young men in the church. So they're very excited about it, and they're going to announce it to everybody. But there was a little bit of backlash on this, and let's see if you can kind of pick up what they said or neglected to say if we listen to this.
Hi, we're the Young Men's Presidency, here to invite you to be sure and tune in to the worldwide youth broadcast. It will be streamed on January 5th. You'll see Sister Freeman and I. We're going to the Sacred Grove to broadcast from there.
Elder Uchtdorf will be speaking to you in this worldwide broadcast.
And you'll see the theme music video for the very first time. So you're going to be able to get excited for this year's theme. Doctrine and Covenants 636, look unto Christ in every thought, doubt not, fear not.
Let's worship together on January 5th. Let's
go shopping.
Let's go shopping. Yeah, they're very enthusiastic. And I don't know if anybody would have really picked up on this, but it is the, Young Men's Presidency, and they're talking about being joined by the Young Women's Presidency for this broadcast. And instead, our guy in the middle there called her Sister Freeman, which is interesting. She is President Freeman. And believe it or not, it caused a little bit of a firestorm in the comments. And if we go to the next slide, I'll read a couple of them. So somebody says, President Freeman, it's important to show our women that we value and respect them by calling them by their title. We would instantly correct ourselves if we called a brother by the wrong title. And should be the same for our women. So there were a lot of comments on this. Someone else says, if it is Sister Freeman, then you are the young men brothers. If you are the presidency, then use her president's title too. So they're really calling him out. The next one says, I'm already excited to hear Brother Nelson speak this coming April conference. Feels weird, doesn't it? Maybe use her proper title as well as President Freeman. I mean, everybody's a president, right? Have you noticed that? Everyone and their dog is a president, just not the general sister of the Young Women's Presidency, right? Oops, you mean President Freeman? Women on the stand said President Freeman is amazing with capital letters. And someone else says the very least you can do for the women of the church is call President Freeman by her title. You give them so little already. And then the final one says, I don't know this brother's name, talking about the middle one speaking. So I thought Sister Freeman and I was a reference to himself and his wife. It did kind of sound like that, didn't it? He's not Brother Freeman. So a little confusion there without using the title. Sister Freeman, is that your sister, your mom? I was looking forward to hearing from President Freeman. I mean, there were quite a few of these comments. And the final one says, really happy that so many are correcting how President Freeman is the proper title and not Sister Freeman, as was said in the video. It is so important to refer to women in the church by their proper titles, just as they say Elder Uchtdorf in the video and not Brother Uchtdorf. It is important for the youth in the church properly recognize President Emily Bell Freeman as the Young Women General President and refer to her by her correct title. So I just thought that was interesting. It just wouldn't have, just because I'm older and women have just been presidents, maybe in the last 5 years, it's kind of a newer title. So I would not have gotten that unless I had happened to look at the comments. Any comments from you guys on the idea that it's still hard for the old guard, right? They're all presidents standing there, President Wilcox and the other two. Sorry, I don't know their names. I'm like,
I feel bad for Dieter because out of everybody involved in this discussion, he's the only one who's not a president.
Exactly. Although we can cross our fingers that someday, right? Someday soon. So
he's a former president.
He is a former president. Yep, absolutely. So any thoughts on that, RFM? Are they having trouble getting used to the fact that women are presidents too, at least for a few years until then their term is over and a new presidency comes in?
I want to hear what Bill has to say, but honestly, the first time I saw this, which is because you found it wherever you found it and sent it, and I looked at it and I didn't understand what the thing was.
Right.
The deal was, and mainly because I don't know anybody except for Brad Wilcox, right? AKA Bongo and the Banana Splits. The other two guys, I have no idea who they are. So when the guy in the middle, right, looks like a retired weatherman, says, hey, I'm going with Sister Freeman. Okay. I figured his last name was Freeman and he was talking about his wife.
Yep.
That's it. But now I realize it's Emily Bell Freeman.
Yep.
By the way, is it just me or I wrote it down because it struck me when he said, Sister Freeman and I will be going to the sacred grove.
Yeah, it does sound a little strange without that title there. And the whole point is it's a fireside or a live broadcast for, with the presidency of the young men and the presidency of the young women, and they're going to be guiding and directing all the youth. And now I will say that in the blurb, it does say President Freeman, her whole name. So, but he just, a little slip up, which again is difficult. And somebody in the comments said, when everybody's a president, nobody's a president. And I will say there are far too many presidents.
Especially not Dieter Uchtdorf.
Exactly. Any thoughts on that, Bill, before we move on?
Just really quick. The church has forever been a thing, and that's patriarchy, and it's ran by men. And really only men get to have the real positions of leadership where nobody above them can tell them what to do. So long as the men keep getting it wrong, no one's ever going to believe that you're changed or done something different. So until you get it right, until you know to call her President Freeman, the rest of us still get signaled the message that this is a sexist patriarchy that doesn't really believe that those women have anything of the same nature of authority as the young men's general auxiliary.
Yep, I think that's the hidden meaning. And again, I wouldn't have picked up on it either because I'm used to, 5 decades of sister and then sister. Sorry, I've seen White Christmas like 3 times in the last 2 weeks. So.
Really have.
I know, I digress. You saw the Nutcracker the other night. So anyway, but again, just 5 decades of hearing the word sister, it just doesn't, it doesn't roll off the tongue that a woman can be president. So got to work on that. All right. Next story up again, plural marriage. Here we go. The cartoon, and RFM's going to tackle this one.
Thank you. Speaking of sisters, plural marriage stories for tots. The fallout begins.
Are you able to change the slides, RFM?
I can. I think I can.
I don't know what happened. Sorry.
All this hubbub started back on December 11th, 2024, with an article which was in the church news room. Revised Illustrated Doctrine and Covenant Stories for Children are now online. And this updated edition in Scripture Stories series comes 40 years after the original Illustrated Doctrine and Covenant Stories, if you remember those. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this from the newsroom on December 11th, has published a revised illustrated edition of Doctrine and Covenant Stories and accompanying videos online, 40 years after the original. Elder Dale G. Renland of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles said that Doctrine and Covenants stories, like other books in the Scripture Story series, helps scriptures come alive for children and their families. These stories, remember, he's saying this, and it's got the thing in that we covered last week, that Rebecca covered last week. And it's been everywhere, and it's going to be in more places because this story is picking up steam about the discussion of plural marriage in these children's stories. These stories help us to get to know the people we read about in the Doctrine and Covenants. We see the revelations from the Lord through their eyes. As a result, those revelations take on new meaning for us. Now, here the story goes on with some interesting things when you're thinking about this particular story about plural marriage. Latter-day Saints will study the Doctrine and Covenants at home and church as part of the 2025 Come Follow Me curriculum for individuals and families. The colorful illustrations and clear, straightforward language in Doctrine and Covenants stories teach Scripture stories to children in engaging ways and are an effective tool for augmenting Come Follow Me discussions each week and explaining stories from church history. The new Doctrine and Covenants Stories series also helps children who can't yet read the standard scriptures participate more fully in family scripture study, etc. Now, by the way, Rebecca, why is it that I have this highlighted, and especially this last thing? I saw you nodding your head.
It just gives you the idea of the age range that these are for, because we've had people say, oh, I'm sure these are for older children. No, these are cartoons, and you can see clearly that their intent is these are for the little guys, the little guys. So
adults reading these stories to little children. So they have a number of stories. This is one from when Emma is serving as scribe, for Joseph Smith, Book of Mormon. This one is about Jane Manning embraces Emma Smith. That's from a different story. I'll bet that's from the story that has to do with the priesthood ban. And here's a story that I know is near and dear to Bill's heart. Mary and Caroline Rollins rescue pages of the Book of Commandments from an angry mob. Hey, Bill?
Yes, sir.
Why is this story so near to your heart?
Well, they name Mary Rollins, but that would also be the name of Mary Elizabeth Rollins Lightner. Her and her sister did rescue the Book of Commandments as a mob was trying to destroy them. That story gets told to us all the time, just like here. What we're not told in correlated church curriculum, at least not anytime prior to 2015, I don't believe, was that Mary Elizabeth Rollins Lightner, when 12 years old, she reported this herself when she was in, I think, her 80s, but she reported that Joseph Smith approached her when she was 12 years old and informed her that she would be a plural wife of his someday, and that she was someday. Just a few years after that, she did become a plural wife of Joseph Smith. That's never told to us in a cartoon. I can't hear you, RFM.
No, we are not told that. I knew you would know exactly what was lurking behind the surface of that innocent seeming cartoon.
Yeah.
So LDS Daily now, which is a very pro Mormon rag, did an article, and this is December 20th. So 3 days ago, controversy brews over plural marriage chapter in official church storybook. So already, after that December 11th article, it's now been 9 days to December 20th. There's a controversy that's brewing. Most of you probably know about it. And as I said, Rebecca reported about it on last week's newscast. Here's what they say. And you can see if you can count how many apologetic tricks they use to try and make it sound like this is a good thing and okay for the church to be doing. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has thoughtfully introduced the section on plural marriage. I have no idea in what sense they're using the word thoughtfully at this point. I mean, is it considerate? Was it full of thought that they did this? Because it doesn't seem like it was either.
Well, and it's ironic because a lot of people say, what were they thinking?
I know. That's what I'm going. What are they thinking? I said it last week. There's so many people involved in this project. The people who conceive it, the idea people, the writers, the artists, the editors, the people who approve it, the people who publish it. Nobody somewhere along the way said, hey, I don't think this is a good idea. It goes on. Once again, the LDS Church has thoughtfully introduced a section on plural marriage in its children's storybook about the Doctrine and Covenants, aiming to provide age-appropriate, that would seem to be the entire issue, which they're assuming, aiming to provide age-appropriate, faith-centered context for a complex chapter in church history. See, it's complex. That's why we have to sort of just make it all shiny and, for the kids. The question is why they're telling the kids at all. The short illustrated chapter begins with Joseph Smith praying about prophets in the Bible who had multiple wives. Because of the millions of people who have read through the Bible in the history of the Bible, you'd be surprised how many of them stop where they read about plural wives and start praying to God about, hey, God, what do you think about this? You think this is a good idea? Do you like it? You think it would look good on me? It explains that Joseph practiced plural marriage while deeply struggling with the commandment. You can jump in anytime you want, either Rebecca or Bill, as I go through this, okay? The chapter also highlights Emma Smith's challenges, the teaching and practice of plural marriage, the imprisonment of leaders who lived it, and the eventual end of the practice with a manifesto by Wilford Woodruff. Yeah, the eventual end. They're not even being straight with you in this article about these scripture stories, these Doctrine and Covenant stories, which themselves are not being straight with you. The chapter has caused controversy online from both members of the church and its detractors. Some parents worry that the inclusion of the information infringes upon their right as parents to control when and how to teach about plural marriage in their family. Others who question plural marriage, like Michelle Stone, say the history behind the practice is weak and unsupported. Well, I think Michelle says it a lot more than that. Those who find the church contemptible, or how about just me, who thinks this is really not a good idea? Those who find the church contemptible have even used online art generators. Oh my gosh. Have even used online art generators to create their own storybook versions with Joseph Smith depicted as a sexual deviant. I did have to laugh out loud here because I thought, I don't think Joseph Smith or you guys need any help depicting Joseph Smith as a sexual deviant. You're doing it right here in the Doctrine and Covenant storybook for children.
Yeah, can I tap in right there?
Please.
Sorry. When I read that, because again, I think they're talking mostly about me and about Ron Jorgensen, because I first made little cartoons showing the rest of the story of the original plural marriage story, right? And then Ron started making cartoons showing a whole bunch of other, pieces of church history and little events that nobody was familiar with. So, but again, sexual deviant, your words, because I didn't say that at all. I simply said things like, sometimes Joseph married a mother and daughter, right? That is a fact. And I never said that was deviant. I said, sometimes he married sisters. I never said deviant. I just said that. So I think these are their words. They're making that judgment call that things taken right out of the Joseph Smith papers and church history. They're the ones that are saying deviant. So,
wouldn't it be funny?
And I also do not find the church contemptible.
Rebecca?
That's also, yes.
Wouldn't it be funny if they obviously said depicting Joseph Smith as a sexual deviant? Wouldn't it be funny if they didn't know that what you were doing was historical?
Yes. And that's what I was talking this over with my co-host on Mormonish Landon, and we both kind of agreed, I bet they don't know. And if you didn't know, if you hadn't read anything about that from church sources themselves, you would think this is crazy. These cartoons are showing mother, daughter, asking a father for his young teenage daughter, sending a husband on a mission. It's a very sordid tale.
They don't know.
Again, if you don't know, that's how you would see it. But
they've got a shock coming.
Happened. Yeah, it would be absolutely shocking.
I want to just say something. A deviant is someone who deviates from the norm. Joseph Smith was a sexual deviant.
Proudly.
By any standard definition of the word. So anyway, you're having sex in marriages with underage girls as young as 14, 2 of them at 14, a few at 15, and then quite a few in 16 up to 18 or so. And then beyond that, of course, as well. The way in which you procured each of those relationships, how you got those young girls to get into a close association with you and got their parents at further distance from them, all of that is outside the norm. Joseph Smith, by your own words, truly is a sexual deviant.
Clinically done.
Yeah.
All right. So is this done? No, still a little bit more from this very pro-Mormon website. Still others appreciate the transparency from the church and its increasing efforts to address difficult topics about a sexual nature with small children. I added the last part. This chapter is not an official lesson. Now listen to the apologetics. This chapter, in other words, the Doctrine and Covenants storybook for children that has this chapter in it, is not an official lesson. Who cares? Didn't you hear what Elder Rinland just said? This is made to supplement and for adults to read it to kids. But they're saying this chapter is not an official lesson, like that somehow is a defense of some sort, and isn't included in the 2025 Come Follow Me manual. Additionally, children's lessons material make no mention of plural marriage. So because it's not in the official children lesson material, it's okay that it's in the unofficial children's lesson material. Even during weeks when it's covered in adult lessons, the storybook covers other difficult topics, including the massacre at Hans Mill and the revelation on race in the priesthood. Okay, leaving aside the fact that that's a complete non sequitur, and just because you say that the manual treats other difficult subjects, it makes it okay to talk about these things that are sexually charged from adult to children, okay? That doesn't follow. But on the other side, at least apparently, they're talking about the church's racism and mass murder with small children. So that's all I have to say about that. Hearing nothing else, I found in my research an absolutely incredible essay that this person wrote. Her name is Lisa. Oh, it's right up here. Lisa Torcaso Downing.
Yeah,
And
she's
apparently she goes
amazing.
by L2
She's
Downing. Do you
amazing,
know
I
her?
have to say. Yeah, she's incredible. Everybody check her out.
How do you know her?
I've actually used some of her essays before in a podcast too. She's a very thorough researcher and she's really smart, and it's Life Outside the Book of Mormon belt.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she
good.
watches our material anymore, but I know early on in my work, she interacted with me a ton. So I'm familiar with her also.
Well, I read this because I was trying to research and I just absolutely fell in love with this essay. It is absolutely spot on and it knocks it out of the park. It's a little bit on the longish side, but absolutely worth it. And I'm going to have to ask for some help from my compañero and compañera to read every other page of this. Okay. So could you start with that, Rebecca?
Sure, I can. If you need more evidence that polygamy culture is alive and well in the contemporary sphere of the LDS, look no further than your Gospel Library app, specifically at the new picture story published in the Doctrine and Covenants Stories for Children, titled Plural Marriage, Faith to Obey a Law from the Lord, Even When It's Hard. And then she has a link to it if you haven't seen it or want to look at it.
By the way, notice it's called A Law from the Lord, only because she's going to refer to that further down.
Yep. It provides a carefully curated cartoon version of early Mormon polygamy, stretching from its beginnings with Joseph Smith to its mythologized ending with Wilford Woodruff's manifesto, all in just 8 panels. To say much is omitted is an understatement. However, its purpose isn't to teach history, but to use well-washed nuggets of facts to tightly define faith as obedience to God through obedience to priesthood authority. This may be the intent, but it seems destined to undermine the mental health, aka the emotional and spiritual well-being of the children of devout Latter-day Saints, including those in the most secure homes, by destabilizing their concept of marital boundaries. Absolutely.
Is this brilliant or what?
It's brilliant because we talked about this last week. As soon as you start that story, the kids will be going, "Mommy, can Daddy have another wife? Did Grandpa?" It destabilizes. I love the way she's saying this. That's exactly what we meant last week.
She uses words like a scalpel. Bill, are you okay to read the next one?
Yep. Yes. So I wasn't raised in the LDS church. I decided to join at 14 and was baptized upon receiving parental consent as I neared 17. Back then, talk of the second coming prevailed, just as it is starting to again. But in the 1970s, leaders emphasized the perilous times, which would predate it. The wars and rumors of war, the natural disasters, and of course, the March of the Faithful back to Zion, Independence, Missouri. Across terrain, burned clean, most likely, we worried, by a nuclear bomb. To Missouri, Jesus would come, and there we would go. Even as a teenager, I was terrified of this great and dreadful day of the Lord. I internalized teaching surrounding the second coming in ways that provided me no comfort in the idea of Christ's return.
And that is going to be an important thesis statement that she's led up to there, that she internalized, and she wasn't the only one. She internalizes the teachings about the second coming in a way that gave her no comfort from the idea of the second coming because of all the destruction and everything, right? And nuclear bombs. Yikes. And of course, now she's going to compare this to the stories about plural marriage. Did you have anything you wanted to add there, Rebecca?
I was just going to say that the same today, and we've talked about that, the doomsday rhetoric that kids are scared. Kids are telling their therapists, I'm upset, I'm worried, I'm nervous. And I've actually gotten in arguments online with people that say, how do you know that? How do you know that LDS kids don't look forward to it? They welcome it. I'm like, because you don't. When you read and understand what it's going to be. As a young person, you're despondent about your future. Do you even have a future? So I completely agree with what Lisa's saying here.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
45
Oh,
45 years later. I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry. I thought you just wanted Bill and I to read. You're reading. Take it away.
Yeah, I got to pull at least a laboring oar.
Yes, you do.
45 years later, I can see how darkly that colored my worldview. I've heard other older adults say that as children, they feared a wide spectrum of turbulent events prophesied to precede the second coming. Everything from fearing they'd be burned alive to fearing their parents would leave their beloved pets behind on the march to Zion. I know they've got a website for that now. Yet they confess they never shared those concerns with their parents. My point is, children absorb information from their parents, teachers, and leaders in ways we may not expect or want, ways they may not tell us, because children assume the message they internalize is the message parents intend to communicate, and more than just kids do that. If I, at 14, quietly feared the second coming, small children seem just as likely to quietly fear disruption of family life if polygamy is presented to them as a commandment that could return, especially if the story is read to them by their mother or father. I'm going to come back to that. And I'm actually just going to repeat it. That is so critical and so well worded. If at 14, I quietly feared the second coming, small children seem just as likely to quietly fear disruption of family life if polygamy is presented to them as a commandment that could return, especially if the story is read to them by their mother or father. Any comments?
I was going to say that often as a parent, if there was something hard to talk about, and I think other parents do this too, you might find a book about it. And you might introduce the topic by reading an age-appropriate book about, like what if a pet died? I remember reading a story about a pet dying to my kids to kind of talk about what's happened to our pet, where, you broach these topics sometimes with an outside source that you as a trusted parent are going to read to your kids. And then that opens the dialogue, or you're kind of trying to give them the message, right? So like Lisa says here, you sit down with your parents and they're reading you something about maybe more mommies, maybe something, the way your family is going to change, and a child is going to go, are they saying, what do they want me to think? What are they trying to say? And they probably won't ask because they can tell that it's sort of a controversial topic. I mean, all of us, I think, can relate to times where we needed to ask our parents something, but we didn't. We just sat on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And worried about it. So I see this in sort of that way.
I'll just add, for every believer out there who is engaging in some effort to defend the church's ability to create these, in positioning yourself as saying that the church is doing the right thing here. Ask yourself, why is it that you feel internal pressure of some sort to side with the church here rather than acknowledge that this can lead to deeply unhealthy outcomes for children, and why you choose to side the other direction? I think that's an interesting internal conversation to have.
It is. And one of the really interesting things about her piece is that her argument is not going to be specific. It's going to be general and all encompassing, and all the more concerning because of that. Next was, is that you, Rebecca?
I think now it's finally me. Yes, I jumped the gun before. Okay. And again, all these have illustrations, right? Here we go. I have some hard questions for parents. Mom, if you read the story to your children, what message might they internalize about you and your place in the family?
Isn't that an interesting question?
Yeah. Yeah, it sure is. And by reading it as a mom, you're saying, I know it sounds like a hard thing, but I would do it or have to do it because, I follow God's commandments. So again, they look at you like, will there be other mommies? It is. It's
Mom is
very
Emma.
stressful.
Emma is mom in this story to a kid whose mom is reading it to her. Probably even if the dad's reading it to her, because he's going to be Joseph.
Yep. And I have a hard time seeing dads reading this cartoon, especially to their little daughters. I don't know. I think it would be more likely to be mom. I'm not sure. And dad, if you read the story to them, what message might they internalize about your commitment to their mother? That she can be disposable if God changes his mind. In that short 8-panel cartoon, he changed his mind 3 times. You don't have to do it. You do have to do it. Oh, wait, you don't have to do it. That took 8 panels of cartoons. I mean, that's nothing.
They packed a lot in there.
Time. Yep. Okay. Okay. So the commitment to their mother or to them. And that's a good point too. Is daddy still my daddy? Does daddy have another family? Are there other kids? I mean, these are questions. The kids are smart. They're going to think these things. Furthermore, children may ask internal questions parents never hear. And this is what I think. I can relate to this so much. What if daddy has a favorite wife and it isn't, my mommy? Will mommy like the new wife? Will the new wife like me? What if I don't like them? What if the new wife is mean, right? The stepmother, we all have fairy tales about that. And on go the troubling uncertainties for our most innocent members.
Bill?
We know that just the idea of divorce quietly stresses children, including those in stable families. It's a fantasy to suppose that introducing the possibility of polygamy wouldn't stress LDS children. It stresses those of us with mature minds, even though as adults we have some control over our destinies. It is naive to think LDS children could escape being negatively impacted by learning from their parents that their faith would require them to disrupt their children's known world, even when it's hard on their children. Kids will wonder if their parents care about them. Of course, the last panel of the cartoon, Plural Marriage, reads, in 1890, the Lord told Wilford Woodruff, the president of the church, that men should not marry more than one wife anymore. The leaders of the church shared this commandment with the saints. This is still the Lord's commandment today. A man should be married to only one wife.
I'll set aside the reality, the author goes on, that this paragraph is far more transparent and focused on that I'll set aside the reality that this paragraph is far from transparent and focus on that tiny 5-letter word still, which means in this context up to and including the present moment. This is what she had just quoted the manual as saying. This is still the Lord's commandment today. And that's why she's focusing on that. It contains no guarantee that monogamous marriage will continue to be the commandment of God, especially because the subtitle of the story calls plural marriage a law. That's when I emphasize that at the top. In LDS theology, a law has more weight than a commandment, being eternal. But most young children won't know this. In time, however, they will learn.
All right, am I up? But parents know it. They remember President Oak's recent General Conference talk about temporary commandments, which in hindsight may be connected to the release of this cartoon story. Parents know the law of plural marriage continues to be practiced in LDS temples each time a widower is sealed to a second woman, forming for himself an eternal plural union, as President Nelson and Oaks have modeled, the top tier of the church. The earthly commandment may currently be monogamous marriage, but the eternal law remains one man and many wives. This is far from transparent, and when kids learn this, out the window goes the careful inoculation, and in sneaks a sense that faithful church members, including parents, deceived them with the one man, one woman rhetoric. Why set kids up for the moment of distrust? Most LDS faith crisis begins the moment that trust is lost.
She goes on, kids aren't stupid. This final paragraph won't eradicate their concerns. The one about, we're not doing it anymore. Okay. This final paragraph won't eradicate their concerns that their entire family could face upheaval if the prophet were to announce the return of plural marriage, considering that message is embedded in the plot. Countless LDS women suffer quietly every day under the threatening cloud of plural marriage because LDS polygamy culture is a culture in which faith is caged by obedience to male priesthood authority. LDS polygamy culture is a culture in which faith is caged by obedience to male priesthood authority. The children of the most devout will take away from this story that their LDS parents would put them on the outs with society, if not the law, and subdivide the family if a man they don't know told them God requires it. And children will sense the emotional harm it will do their mothers in particular. It may alienate them from their fathers or distance them from both parents in order to protect their emotional selves. Rebecca?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Lisa's saying. And I think, when you read the story and you get to that last panel, a child is going to go, so it's not that way now, but can it be again? That's the next logical question, because you've gone through those 8 panels and it's flip-flopped so many times. And then what does the mother say? Then do you reveal some of those truths that Lisa just mentioned here? Do you reveal that, well, in the next life, yes, honey, it is going to be that way. And then how does your daughter look at you as a mom saying that? How does your son look at you? How do they look at dad? You're absolutely right. And kids internalize so much. This is just another thing to lay awake and worry about, that you're never going to tell your parents, and your parents may not guess this is what you're concerned about. But yeah. This is big. These are big questions, and it's very disturbing when you think that something could happen to your family as you know it, right? When you're a kid, that's your whole world. That something could happen, that's probably your biggest fear. And here it is, God could reach down and say something that would change everything in your little bubble that you have there.
If it is not clear, our concern about this, and I'll speak for myself, my objection to this, and obviously this author, Lisa, her objection to is not that they are sharing the information with members of the church, which on the whole, as a generality, would be a good thing, and they should do more of it, as they haven't done much of it at all in the past. The objection that I and others have is that it is being shared with small children who are so young they can't even read, by adults. And she's going to go on and talk about the problem with that, even if the person who's reading to it isn't intentionally trying to groom them.
Yep. And I'll just say really quickly before I read it, I mean, I was that child. I was taught polygamy I always knew that, someday I would be in a polygamous situation in heaven. I knew all about that. I've talked about this before. And it wasn't until I got to be, like a 13, 14, where I started to realize what that would mean. And I would get so upset that I would cry about it, because, I would experience the jealousy looking forward. I'm going to have to share whoever I'm with, even though I grew up with it, and it was very normalized to me. The stories about the polygamy raiders and hiding the second wife, those were just family stories, casual stories told in my family. And, it wasn't until I got to that age where I started to understand what a romantic relationship would be and understand that jealousy aspect that I was so upset about polygamy that I would literally cry over it. So this is just another way to raise kids like I was raised. So I don't know. All right, let's finish. Lisa's so good. This is such a great essay. I think she said kids aren't stupid, right? Did we move forward one? Or are we on the right one? Okay. My predictions feel obvious. What is less obvious, however, is the degree to which active LDS women feel destabilized in their marriage because they realize plural marriage could return. Prior to marrying, many women make it clear to their fiance that plural marriage would be a deal breaker. Many proclaim and or reiterate this well into their marriage when children arrive and the threat feels more intense. Even more telling, many LDS women swallow their boundaries, hoping God will bless them in their submission. The dangerous idea has its roots in our toxic polygamy culture and would not exist without the planted fear that disobedience will make one unworthy to God's highest reward and deem a woman worthy of destruction. D&C 132. I had somebody ask me on a post I made, where is that? That's not real. I'm like, 132, baby. Every LDS woman, whether she admits or not, is emotionally scarred by our polygamy culture. And every LDS marriage is weakened to one degree or another by an LDS wife's knowledge that the shape of her eternal marriage is ultimately out of her control. Our history is replete with stories of men breaking their marital promises of fidelity in the name of God, and astonishingly, some of our scriptures and authorized correlated content celebrate it.
And now children's stories are
now
celebrating it.
Yep.
Can you take this one, Bill?
I'll take this one. Okay. I'll just note too, somebody in the comments said lots of those cartoon images are prayers at a bed, kneeling at a bed. I think we said this maybe last week or somebody in the chat did, but I just want to note it again. It's so easy. And I don't even think completely unintentional on the church's part, but when you put a bed into a story that also involves marriage, you are indicating some degree of intimacy, if not sex, at least intimacy. And I think that just complicates all of this even more. So I'll just say that. Okay. I understand that within Mormonism's polygamous offshoots, there are women who champion plural marriage. I'm not going to challenge them on their lived experience, but it's my opinion that should plural marriage be restored in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, women would live an experience more closely aligned with the experience of the church's earliest plural wives than with that of contemporary women who grew up in social systems enculturated for polygamous families. Regardless, this post isn't intended to do anything but consider how contemporary LDS children and women experience life while knowing plural marriage threatens the stability of their family structures. And I think she makes a great point, which is if you've grown up generation after generation after generation in the fundamentalist groups, not that it's any better, but you are raised your entire life sort of going like, oh, well, this is what we do. The fear that something would come back that you're not currently practicing on some level is a whole different set of stressors and maybe potentially more stressful than just living in it from birth on. And that's the point I think she's trying to make.
Obedience culture is polygamy culture. I honestly think that we should just print this out and carry it with us and make it some sort of a, I don't know, something committed to memory. It's so good. Obedience culture is polygamy culture. The doctrine of the LDS Church grooms all of its members, but especially women and children, to act against our God-given instinct to protect ourselves. Grooming is behavior that establishes a relationship of trust between an authority figure and a child or another adult, and desensitizes them in ways that could facilitate harm being perpetrated against them. We usually think, here she's drawing that distinction I mentioned, we usually think of grooming as an act done by a perpetrator of a sex offense, and of course, perpetrators are known to hide within the church system. However, in LDS Mormonism, grooming also occurs when a church leader or parent who is not a perpetrator presents obedience to authority as the loftiest of goals, thereby weakening needful boundaries, and preparing the innocent for predation by someone else. Your thoughts, Bill?
I've said this before. Mormonism carries on its effort to teach all of its members that loyalty and obedience is the first law of heaven, that loyalty and obedience are the top echelon of commandments in Mormonism. Those are the two things you need to be. And when you don't do that, let me say it differently. When you do that, when you teach people loyalty and obedience with the tactics that the LDS Church uses, you do create unsafe boundaries. You teach little girls from a young age that being in a room with a grown adult stranger man is normal, that stranger man asking questions of a sexual nature is normal, that he talks to God and that you should answer him. And maybe, and in most instances, the bishop's a great guy. He never takes it too far. He never crosses some boundary. But then your daughter grows up and she goes off to college. And now she's dealing with young men. And if she goes to BYU, there's an extra layer of trusting the returned missionary as being a representative of God. He has the priesthood. If I can't trust him, who can I trust? And then these young girls who are now young women will put themselves in positions because they've been taught unsafe boundaries. They will put themselves in positions where they think they have a safe boundary, but it's one that every psychologist and therapist in the country would say is unsafe. And because you, LDS Church, have taught people unsafe boundaries as safe boundaries, you set people up to be abused for their entire life until they figure out that you taught them the wrong thing.
Wow. Magnificent. The Holy Ghost is strong upon you tonight with great power, Bill Reel. What eloquence. What passion.
I was going to say that reminds me of my grandma, who was just a super smart lady, but this just barely came to me based on what Bill had just said. When I was 16, a group of friends and I went to Especially for Youth on BYU campus, right? And that's supposed to be a safe environment. And you're in high school and you travel there and you stay for a week in a dorm. And there's guys and girls and you have dances and things like that. And my grandma, my parents didn't have this talk with me, but my grandma took me aside and she said, look, there have been some reports that there is a predator who is posing as, and especially for youth, this was in the 80s, you know, he's somebody that's there. They had some trouble at the last session and they weren't able to determine who it was, but there have been some incidences, right? And she goes, I don't care if the young man that asked you to dance is wearing a suit. I don't care if he tells you that he's headed on a mission. She just went down the list and she goes, you be strong, you be wary, you be careful, you know, and we all went, okay, you know, but I look back at that and I think some people get it. They understand that these little LDS girls, I think especially, you know, the way I was raised in the 80s, they are so innocent and so trusting, like Bill just described, that that's all it takes is someone in a suit saying, I'm headed on a mission. Would you like to walk over this direction with me? You know, so some people do get it, but it's really sad that you have to warn people like that because you know that they're so innocent.
Wow. Can you take over on this slide now?
And it goes on. Here we go.
It does.
So
It's a bit lengthy.
good.
I wouldn't do this except I think it's so good.
No, it's so important. It brings up so many other things. This is so great. This would actually just be an episode. You guys should take this on to Mormonism Live and do it. It's incredible. The bishop grooms a teen for sex offenses by discussing sensitive sexual topics behind closed doors, thus normalizing conversations about masturbation, orgasm, and position, etc. This increases the likelihood that teens will be taken advantage of by a predator who is also perceived as having authority over them, like I just described, which includes every male age 11 and up once ordained. The same is true of any church leader or teacher at any level who persists in preaching that the Holy Spirit or even the light of Christ or conscience would never tell us something contrary to whatever the current teaching is of the sitting president prophet of the church. The cartoon story in question also grooms children through an approved source, likely with the unintended collusion of parents or primary teachers. Polygamy culture insists we override our instincts for self-preservation and well-being because we should have the faith to obey a law from the Lord even when it's hard. How many times have we said this? This, while at the same time we confess prophetic fallibility in order to make the unacceptable statements of the past carry no weight today, church leaders have used this tactic throughout our history and will continue to do so in the future.
You know what I thought was really interesting in that paragraph was her identification, and correctly, I believe, of she's talking about the idea that increasing the likelihood that a teen will be taken advantage of by a predator. And what the author says is that occurs every time any church leader or teacher at any level persists in preaching that the Holy Spirit would never tell us something contrary to whatever President Nelson is teaching us, to whatever the prophet is teaching us. Because what we're saying is we can't trust our own feelings. We can't trust our self-preservation. We have to give it entirely to a priesthood authority.
Yeah, and speaking as a young woman, raised as a young woman in the church, that is what you learn. It is a priesthood authority that you can receive this knowledge and light from. So when you go to BYU and somebody after a week says, "Oh, I think you're the one. I've gotten the communication. You're the one." You're like, "Well, gosh, I don't know you, but could you be right? I don't know." I mean, you entertain it more than you ever would because you've been prepared for that moment. So it's hard to describe what it is to be a girl in the church, especially decades ago.
Mormonism teaches you to question your conscience. Your conscience doesn't prevail when there's a discrepancy between your conscience and what your religion teaches or what your religious leader says. And you should never do that. People should be taught to go like if your gut is telling you that something isn't right here, you should be allowed to explore that, think about that, and almost certainly trust it. Do what is safe for you. Create whatever safe space you need for yourself. And the church's message is something very different from that. It tells you, oh, your conscience says something's wrong here. Well, you're the one who's wrong. That's the prophet. That's the official church leader. That's the bishop. That's the returned missionary. That's the priesthood holder. You can't question that. You're the one who's wrong. And we have church leaders, Elder Oaks, who said that the way you know someone's got the wrong revelation is because it didn't agree with us. Well, sometimes, maybe, even in the true church, people should be allowed to have their revelations that contradict the church's.
Very good. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. Is that Angry Alice? Is that what I'm hearing, Rebecca?
Soaring. I think she might have a cold, so I'm going to have to mute and unmute because it's not me. Okay, I'm not making that sound, but she definitely is. But I was going to say to that, if I could describe it kind of, because I have been in situations where it's like your intuition and your conscience goes onto autopilot and it doesn't work anymore. You know, I have found myself in situations as a teenager, invited into classrooms alone with adult leaders. Never should have ever said yes to things like that. You know, luckily in my situations, other people came in. But when I look back at that, I think, what were you thinking? Just because a male leader says, "Rebecca, I need to talk to you, come into this room," you don't need to do that. Yet I did do that. And it's just your conscience and your gut. It's an automatic response. Someone who has authority has asked me to do this. I'm going to do it. So I don't know.
Is there any theme stronger in what we hear all the time at the church and in conference and from leaders and in manuals that we are to do what our leaders tell us to do because they have contact with God and receive revelation for us? It's the foundation. It's the fundamental of Mormonism. Okay. So, Bill, can you take this slide? We're almost done, folks. Promise.
This cartoon history of plural marriage is an inoculation against troublesome elements of LDS history. It's toxic injection of a definition of faith that teaches children to ignore their self-interest and safety in the face of authority and destabilizes their sense of security within the family. It is vital we respect the feelings of ill ease that our polygamous past instills, especially in LDS females, young and old. We must refuse to inflict on children the same psychological damage and work to reduce the risk of physical harm that our polygamy culture inherently generates. The children of the LDS Church deserve better. They deserve an end to polygamy culture and its pernicious insistence members override our emotional needs and spiritual gifts under the guise that obedience to patriarchal authority equates to obedience to God. Our faith must center on the messages of Jesus, not the reinterpretation of them by fallible human beings. We all have the same gift of the Holy Ghost, which stands as the divine equalizer of lowly saint and celebrated apostle. Don't let anyone limit your use of this divine gift or the use of your conscience.
Remember, no one stands between us and the divine, not unless we invite them to. When you read Plural Marriage, Faith to Obey a Law from the Lord, Even When It's Hard, that's the chapter title in the children's storybook. When you read that, you'll most likely recognize the destabilizing threat that it is to your children's psyches. Then please recognize how the threat of polygamy is already destabilizing our homes through the burden of fear it places on women. We would be a stronger church with stronger families if we banished plural marriage from our doctrine. If the church leaders wanted to inoculate children against the worst of our history, it would treat 19th century polygamy as a cautionary tale from which we learned that the plural marriages of the past more often than not hurt the stability and mental health of our people, be they men, women, or children.
Yeah.
And here's the last one. Rebecca.
In 1869, Zena Diantha Huntington, who was married to Henry Jacobs, at the time she was sealed as a plural wife to Joseph Smith, and who later became a plural wife of Brigham Young, recorded the attitude of her polygamous culture when she penned, "It is the duty of a first wife to regard her husband not with a selfish devotion. She must regard her husband with indifference, and with no other feeling than that of reverence. For love we regard as a false sentiment, a feeling that should have no existence in polygamy." And on that unsettling note, I will end. And that's a real thing. That's a real thing for women who get married and recognize that someday they're going to have to share their spouse. I think you necessarily withhold a little bit, pull back a little bit. I mean, maybe not even consciously, but that thought is in your head. And I'll just share this quick story. I think I've told it before, but I worked with a woman whose husband died. They were in their early 60s. And one day at work, she was crying, and I went to her, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" She goes, I miss him. That's one thing. But what I'm really upset about is I know he's dating now. I know he's picking out his other wives. I know he's up there, and I feel such extreme jealousy. So even in death, even in mourning a marriage of 30 years, whatever it was, she couldn't do that. She couldn't focus on memories. She couldn't focus on missing him. She had jealousy because she knew he was in the spirit world dating. That's how she put it, and that is just horrifying.
Yes.
Can I say one more thing before you
Please
go to
do, and then I'll hand it back to Rebecca.
Yeah. You do have one more there, just the story is gaining steam one. But
Oh, yeah. Thank you for reminding me.
I just want to note there's another facet of this, and it gets brought out in part with what just got said by Lisa Downing. I wondered at the beginning of this, I thought to myself, who and why might this spiritual lesson based in history be useful? And I thought, well, it's not written because it's a story about the revelation coming that runs counter to the standard that the saints were practicing. It runs against the expected way of doing things. So it can't be to a member who receives a revelation to do things different than the church is doing them. The church excommunicates those people as quick as it can. For example, Denver Snuffer would be an example of that. So then what it must be is it can only be meant or intended to a person who isn't speaking to God directly, but has another person as a middleman who claims to speak for God on God's behalf. Tell the person that a revelation's been received and that you need to do a thing that runs against the standard of what we do. And then it teaches you that, yes, that's what you do, is you obey that. And I'm trying to think of, there's 1,000 instances where that would be the most unhealthiest thing to do. There's an expected way that we've all been taught by our schools and our families about how we interact with each other. And another person comes to a child, or an adult, but a child, and says, I know this is the way we do things, but a revelation has been received, and this is the new way we're going to do things. This is the new expectation of how you should carry out your interaction with me and the world. And I just don't think we want kids having a message like that. And so the church, in its effort to inoculate people over history so that nobody could say, you never told me that, hasn't thought this one through at all. And you're beginning to see the apologists, LDS Daily, defend it as a thoughtful portrayal. And yet it doesn't take one very long at all to start seeing the weaknesses in this. And Lisa, I think, brought out several more for us to consider.
Yes, and you were right. Thank you for pointing my attention to this last slide. The story is gaining steam. As I said at the outset, I'll close with here at the end is I have reports that this is going to probably be showing up in the Salt Lake Tribune maybe this week, and maybe in other major newspapers, such as maybe the I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, something over there on the East Coast. I won't limit it to anything in particular, but I think this is going to take off because this has all the elements of a story that everybody's going to look at the church and say, what on earth are you thinking? Back to you, Rebecca.
Wow, that was an excellent story. My goodness, I feel like we need to take a break or something. That was a lot, but
Sorry
it's
about
interesting. No. I mean, a break in a good way, like kind of, that was a lot to cover, but so important. And I hope that this article, that this blog post gets a lot more traction because she said it so well. So everybody, please look up Lisa, look up her blog. Maybe we can include it in the show notes and pass this around. It's excellent. And I think it's interesting because at first I think I was really focused on, look what they left out, look what they left out. And I really did, make that kind of the key of what I was talking about and podcasting about. But then as time went on, I started to realize what it really meant as far as the children and the grooming. And I think that is what outside sources will focus on. They don't know the inside baseball to know what was left out, but they sure know when something's inappropriate for children that can't even read. And I think that's why RFM's right. You're going to see this picking up steam. So, all right, let's head on to the next story. And again, I'm sorry, you're going to have to flip my slides. I have no idea what's wrong with this. So this was something on social media that really also got a lot of traction. Somebody posted on Ex-Mormon Reddit. It was a letter. They were at work. They got up from their desk. They came back. And there's a letter sitting at their desk. That's always very mysterious. And I don't know if you can make that bigger. I'll try to read it off my phone because it's a little crumpled, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, okay. So it says, Dear so-and-so, and it's been, kind of whited out. It says, we miss you. I understand that everybody's journey in life is different, but we miss you. We need you. We need your unique perspective and experience to help the rest of us navigate this crazy life. You have so much to offer, whether you think you do or not. I promise that you do. Our kids miss your kids. School is one thing. Playing in the neighborhood or on teams together is another, but it's an entirely different thing to go to youth camps, to have spiritual experiences, and to hear each other's testimonies. We miss them. Let me go to my next page here. Please come back. I'm kind of reading this with exclamation points. It really only has a period, but that's how I read it in my mind. The first Sunday back is the hardest. Why not make it the easiest Sunday of the year? This Sunday, and again, this letter was received last week, December 22nd is only sacrament meeting. It will be a Christmas sacrament meeting with singing and short talks. 1 hour. No classes after. Just come and hear the testimonies of Jesus being sung and talked about. Put Christ back in your Christmas this year. Please come. We miss you. We love you. We need you back. We miss your kids. We need them back to help our kids. Hope to see you there. An anonymous neighbor. You can imagine this generated a lot of response because
it sounded so personal before that.
Yeah.
We need you. We love you.
Yeah.
We miss you. Signed, Anonymous.
Anonymous, right? And it's only an hour. Like, it's just an hour. It's not that crappy long 2-hour thing. It's just an
No
hour. And it's
classes.
Christmas.
You don't have to bother
Yeah.
with that crap.
So this person, everybody was talking about how this had happened to them, or they'd been invited back with a cookie plate, or an experience like what I had where somebody walked right up to me and said, "I miss you." And I said, "I'm looking at you right now."
I'm right here.
Hello, exactly, but I know what they're trying to say is we miss you in the fold, right, in the body of Christ. So it was an interesting letter. I was excited to share it on the newscast because I thought a lot of people could relate. And then just at the very last minute, I thought I'm going to go through all those comments and see if original poster said anything else about it. And if you go to the next slide, I'm glad I did, because there's more to this story. So suddenly, about a day or so, a couple days after he posted this, he said, "Shit, how do I add to or edit this post?" Right? I just learned the tea. My coworker actually got this in her mailbox in Bluffdale last night. Same handwritten name, everything. She thought it was so funny. She copied it and left it on a couple of our desks today. So good. She got me. So I think a lot of people were horrified that someone had used this approach at work, right? How dare you at work leave a letter? And so what really happened is this was given to someone in a mailbox, same letter, same sentiment, but that person wanting to play a little prank, put it on a couple people's desks to freak them out. Probably people she knew who had stepped away, but it's not unheard of. I have a friend whose parents sent the missionaries to her place of work, and they went through the front desk, they went through security, they made it all the way up to her office in this building. And she's like, "What are you doing here?" I mean, this is my place of work. So I guess in the chat, you guys can share, have you ever been approached, at work? Have you gotten these kind of well-meaning letters? And I guess maybe weigh in a little bit, RFM, and then Bill, what do you think about, especially this season, right? People really want to reach out. They see it as an opportunity, to try to encourage someone to come back. Have you ever received anything like this, RFM?
No, usually people are trying to keep me away. That's what I usually run into. Now, what I like about this is the fact that you did research. You read through all of these comments because you thought, maybe the person who did the original comment will come back and say something else that might be useful. You found it. And this addendum to the story changes it considerably because it's not some well-meaning Mormon putting a letter on their desk of their coworker, right?
Right.
It's a well-meaning Mormon sending a letter in the mail to somebody apparently that they know in Bluffdale. So this takes a lot of the sting out of the story, yet you report it, yet we report it. Why? Because even though it doesn't make this particular Mormon look worse, right? It would look worse if you left this out.
Yeah.
It looks better for the Mormon if you include this, because our goal is to report the news as best we can, and we don't have a particular agenda about it. We do have a certain category and aim to talk about things Mormon, but we want to try and be as correct as we possibly can be. Thank you for that, Rebecca.
Yeah, that's right. What about you, Bill? Have you ever received anything like this? Or have you ever sent anything like this when you were a bishop?
Yeah, we certainly made lots of effort to bring less actives back to the church. I'll say this, that in the scope of people who want to help you come back and claim to care about you and want to make that effort, if your reasons are really good reasons for why you don't come back, that conversation really isn't invited to be a two-way conversation. In other words, the moment you go, like, "That's great, I appreciate that, but I'd like to share with you my reasons for why I don't want to come back," that conversation generally ends pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think so. And I have one more slide kind of on this topic. Again, this is off of Faithful social media. Somebody asked the question, inviting non-members with an offer of refreshments afterwards, right? So this person has an idea and wants to run it past some others on Faithful social media. And it's titled, "Come and See. What are your thoughts about enticing non-members in a senior living center with a small treat afterwards to attend a Sunday Christmas program held in their facility? I am soliciting all views, pros and cons. Obviously, the treats would be arranged the day before the service." And then a little later, he posts again, "Since these are non-members who usually resist our efforts to attend, we thought maybe a Krispy Kreme donut or some type of sugar-free option for those who require it would be incentive for some to come and see. Just the word entice kind of struck me, because I've had parents in senior living for the last couple of years before they passed away, and so as I understand it, the person is putting on a program, and it says the non-members are resistant. They do not, non-members, right? Resistant.
Yes.
They don't want to come to the program.
They're
But
crotchety.
if they hear there's a treat there, they might want to go. So
They're crotchety.
God bless them. They
This
just want to
donut
get them
is
there.
very delicious to the taste. And so, it's funny because I look at this, and what they're trying to do is get this sucker baptized, right? They say, we want what's left of your life. We want all of your disposable time. We're going to separate you from your grandkids if you'll do what we tell you to do and go on a mission. And 10% of your income is going to go to the church in perpetuity.
Oh, yeah.
But hey, you get this great donut.
That's right. I'll do anything for donuts. I do understand that. But these senior centers, and I've said this before, when I found out that the branch president was coming over to visit my parents and leaving tithing slips and helping them fill them out ahead of time so that they could easily pay tithing, in their late 80s, I was like, wow, how convenient,
Isn't it?
So you got to watch it. It might be a tithing slip one day. It might be a donut the next. It might be, hey, why don't you change your beneficiary? Here, let me give you the paperwork.
Did he help them fill out their checks too?
Probably. Who knows? I don't know. What do you think, Bill?
I would say, RFM, you said we ask you to or require you to serve a mission. No, that's old news at RFM. It's we ask you to serve 2 missions.
Right.
At least 2. At least. Get up out of your senior center. That's right. Get back out there. You are never too old. You can do it. Look at President Nelson, right? So anyway,
You'll be looking back and saying, I should have asked for another donut.
That's right. Grab a couple and just get in your little jazzy scooter and head on down the hall. See if they'll chase you. So, but anyway, a lot of well-meaning neighbors, and we love our neighbors. But we're not gone. We're right here, usually right next door. So you can still come talk to us. I think that's the message.
All right. Here we go.
All right. I think we have Bill's story now. This was a
yay.
really interesting one.
I'll let you take that.
All right, great. So a while back, and we covered this here on the Mormon Newscast, but the church began its release. It's sort of a soft release of its new hymn book, and it started with the first 13 songs that were released. And so we covered that. I chuckled again because it's church news. We talked about this, I think, last week or week before, a living record of the restoration. This is the new ongoing restoration rhetoric that we get. So there's that.
Hey, Bill,
Yes.
that slide is a perfect symbol because the entire left side of it under the title is blank.
Yeah. Living
It's
record.
just waiting to be written on. This living record of the restoration.
Years and years of revelations to come. So the first 13 songs got released. First batch of songs, Salt Lake Tribune here, first batch of songs for new LDS hymn book is out. Did your favorite make it? So they're starting to kind of present it to the believing audience, to the folks who still go to church, and say like, hey, what do you notice? What's different? There's I think it's a YouTube channel that's titled God Loves Mormons, and they had a thing. The LDS Church added Amazing Grace to their hymnal. Here's what's missing. And it was an acknowledgement that while Amazing Grace is one of the new songs, that it's not all the verses that are original to the song Amazing Grace. The church, the LDS Church that is, selectively chose which verses to make it. And not that has to be anything bad. Church songs might be limited to keep it to 3 or 4 verses and hence a shorter song. But in this instance,
Wayfaring Man of Grief.
Yeah.
Trump, your argument.
Yep.
The reason why is because there are things that are doctrinally suspect, and they did the same thing with several of the Christmas hymns that were in the hymn book. If you happen to know all the verses, which for whatever reason, when I was 12 or 13, I set myself the task of learning them. And then you come upon this, and they take like the first part of one verse and the last part of another verse and stick them together. It's like what they're doing with stakes and wards now in order to make it seem like the church isn't shrinking. That's what they did with these hymns. And I that's the same thing they did with Amazing Grace. And I'm sure it was in the gracier parts of the hymn.
Yeah, and it is. I was going to say, while that might be true for other songs, it seems quite apparent that Amazing Grace was limited for certain reasons. And you're giving members the idea like, hey, we're moving into this grace thing. And we'll talk about that in this story too. But the church is still trying to make sure that Protestant grace and Mormon grace are different. So then LDS Living had another article, same thing. Amazing Grace is now in the hymn book. See the Book of Mormon verses listed with it. So a different article, but regarding the same hymn. And then the Religious News Service. Now this is where it gets to the current moment. Jana Reese, who I think is incredible. And I think that she does a great job from the inside, nudging people to think more broadly about Mormon issues. She just released an article in the last day or so that said what the new LDS hymns say about Mormon theology. And so that's where we'll spend our time. I just want to start off by saying, and this gets acknowledged in one of the quotes from Jana, but Mormonism used to teach a very particular kind of grace and works theology. After all we can do was understood a certain way. And then a moment came where it started off with Stephen Robinson and his believing Christ. It was followed up by Robert Millett and his effort to talk about grace. From there, it went to our good friend Brad Wilcox, who at the time I very much appreciated and still do his effort there to help move us away from old Mormon grace theology to something more functional and more beneficial to the human beings who are listening to it. And since him, you had Elder Uchtdorf, who utilized sort of that Brad Wilcox rhetoric in a general conference talk. And in fact, I think there's one of these here. Yep, that bottom middle one, After All We Can Do, Dieter Uchtdorf. And then you had Sherry Dew, Amazed by Grace. You have Adam Miller, Original Grace. You get the book there by Robert Millett, which I think is a little newer. And so you have this sort of conglomerate of LDS authors, including one apostle, who are moving the needle. And the theology today in Mormonism on grace is quite a bit different from 1980s, 1990s grace works theology in Mormonism. And so something's changed. And I think Jana picked up on that. So Jana started talking about, these were quotes from that article from the Religious News Service. Jana said, "We've got Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing," which was the number one request when church members were asked to submit ideas and suggestions for the new hymnal. This one isn't so much new to Latter-day Saints as Restored, since it was in the hymnal for several decades before the 1985 edition we currently use. Thank you, Bruce. She finishes up saying, "If I had to guess a theological reason why it was removed and then restored, it would be that this is primarily a hymn about God's grace, a concept that some LDS leaders were often deeply uncomfortable with." And she noted specifically, she said, in 1984, Elder Bruce R. McConkie suggested the, quote, "delusion and mania that prevails to this day in the great evangelical body of Protestantism, the doctrine that we are justified by faith alone without the works of the law. It is the doctrine that we are saved by grace alone without works. It is the doctrine that we may be born again simply by confessing the Lord Jesus with our lips while we continue to live in our sins." She followed that up by saying, "The last 2 decades have seen a theological shift away from McConkie's extremism and toward a reconciliation with the idea of grace, though our version of it is not as radical a view of grace as some evangelical Christians have espoused." And then she brings that to the hymn Amazing Grace. She says, "In fact, we're so comfortable with grace now that another of the newly added hymns is Amazing Grace, the standard bearer for that theological concept. But as the liner notes make clear, even this has a history of being in an earlier LDS hymn book, 1841. So there is precedent." She said, and this was regarding the hymn Bread of Life, Living Water. She said, "Here too, we see an emphasis on classical Protestant theology. Bread of Life, Living Water focuses on the precious gifts of Christ's atonement." She noted that several of the hymns focused on the atonement taking place on the cross, and that in Mormonism, often you either have to join the cross with Gethsemane, or in some instances, you see quotes that intimate that the atonement, in essence, took place in Gethsemane, where Christ bled, as it were, blood like sweat out of every pore. So she said, as bread is broken, while as bread is broken ties LDS weekly sacrament traditions with the suffering on the cross. And I want to note then she goes into a section where she talks about what has been removed, and she gives her guess as to why. She says, maybe the point becomes clear when we think about the kinds of themes present in earlier LDS hymns, but manifestly not here. There's no discussion of Zion as the gathering of God's people, for example, and no focus on key geographic locations like Missouri, which we have classically been taught have vital roles to play in the last days. And then she made a suggestion about what else might be cut. As we see the rest of these hymns come forward, what is she sort of guessing is going to be the case? And so we can see how good she is at being a prophet, seer, and revelator. She says, when the new hymnal is finalized, I'm predicting that we'll see a real gutting of the content from about hymn number 33 to somewhere in the mid-50s. The hymns that can be recast with Zion as an idealized pure in heart theme can stay, number 41 and number 47, while the ones that explicitly refer to Zion as a mountain refuge or that are just too weird to play nicely with Protestant rapprochement may quietly disappear. I'd be surprised if Adam Ande Amen, number 49, makes the cut. She goes, what will be emphasized? And this goes right along with that polygamy cartoon, by the way. There's one thing in Mormonism that will never be laid upon the altar, and that is every effort and manipulation made to create loyalty and obedience. So she said, what will be emphasized? If there's going to be anything that sets our hymns apart from Protestants going forward, I predict it will be a focus on obeying church leaders. That's certainly been a theme of General Conference in recent years. In terms of hymnody, I doubt that emphasis on lauding modern prophets and apostles will rise to the idolatrous levels of praise to the man, number 27, which actually positions Joseph Smith in the role of a Christ-like intercessor on the other side of the veil. But the main theological point will be clear. Latter-day Saints are Christians, and our view of Christ is as orthodox as those of any other churches. But we also have the only true prophet living on the earth today. Now, I'm just going to step in here. This is me, Bill, speaking. Latter-day Saints are Christians, and our view of Christ is as orthodox as those of any other churches. I don't believe that, and I think there are lots of statements by leaders which would demonstrate that, and I think there's lots of things in our scriptures that would demonstrate that. But that's the argument I think Mormonism is trying to make, is that we are just as Christian as you, except we have a living prophet. And that's the last slide for that story. I'll just note that we won't know yet. We need to watch these hymns come out. We have a bit of a hunch based on what is sort of gone and what has come in these first few. But once we get it all collected, I think there will be a bunch of us in this public space who have conversations about what the new hymn book means for the future of Mormonism. What do you guys think?
I want to start a pool. We'll take bets on the dates. We'll just go by
Vegas.
months and years, okay, of when it is that the first cross jewelry are going to be sold at Deseret Books.
I mean, we're already wearing it, right? People are already wearing it. It's just fine. And again, I can't describe, and you guys were both converts as older teenagers, how different it was when I was growing up. No crosses, no grace. I had a friend who was Baptist. I would sometimes go to like Bible study with her, and I would come home and talk to my parents about what I learned. I would talk about singing songs about grace. They said grace was lazy, sloppy, and we don't believe in that. We work hard. And then, if we need a little extra nudge, Jesus helps us. Professors at BYU who had this concept down early on, like a Eugene England, they were chastised by apostles and hounded for this concept of grace. And so it's just so funny that now everything is grace. Even the Christian music that we've talked about before, the praising, I'm telling you, every Mormon of a certain age is rolling over in their graves. It's just so
I'm not.
different Well, I'm talking about a much older, somebody like my
Okay.
parents who their whole life, no crosses, no grace. That's not our church. And I agree with what you say, Bill. It's interesting as I interact with the residents who are involved in the temple building, and I talk to them and they want to know more about Mormonism. And they're all members of their own churches. That's what's so interesting about all these residents who are, quote, fighting the temples. They're all very religious people. And, as they get to know about Mormonism more, they eventually say, I know you guys think you're Christian, but you have a prophet who's in between, right? Deity and the earth. And you have this other scripture. It just doesn't fly. As much as we think it is, and we try to downplay it, those two things make a huge difference in us being seen as Christian to other Christians.
I wanted to say something and put this on the record. See if this squares with your recollection too, Rebecca, and anybody else out there who's around the 60s or 70s and paying attention in the LDS Church. I really think that the atonement, the doctrine of the atonement, has changed in a drastic manner since I joined the church in 1978. So here is what I remember being taught and my conception of the atonement, including statements by Spencer W. Kimball, which is, it was our responsibility through dint of our own effort and willpower and pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, which was the comment, the phrase by President Kimball, that in order to keep the commandments. Now, on the way to getting there, we're going to make mistakes and we're going to break a few things accidentally. But that's okay, because Jesus is the janitor who goes behind us with the mop to clean it up. But still, we've got to do it by dint of our own willpower. And that was the teaching that I understood for a long time. Then it started getting modified. And Bill brought up those books by the different authors, especially Stephen Robinson and Robert Millett. In the late 80s, I think they were actually already starting on that. And then it's continued to something else. But now today, if I listen to General Conference, and I do, what I'm hearing the leaders say is not that the atonement is there to clean up the mess after you, but they've actually gone to the point where they say that the atonement is the power of Jesus in you so that you can obey the commandments and be obedient. And that sounds very small to say it, but it is a massive doctrinal shift. And it's also a shift that goes toward what more Orthodox or Christians believe, at least in the evangelical circles. I won't speak for any others, but I'm pretty sure that that's what they say about the atonement. Well, perfection isn't required for them. But it is the power of God unto being a good person. Any goodness that we have comes from God. Okay. So it's not completely identical, but I think it is a move in that direction. So can I get a witness out there? Does anybody else remember that?
I will, because this is a phrase that my mom taught me and my sister. You have to earn the atonement. You don't just get it. You have to earn the atonement. That was drummed into our heads. And I had a conversation with my sister just a couple of years ago. She went on a mission. I did not go on a mission. And she's active. And she said, I never knew that wasn't really correct until I got on my mission. And I tried to express that idea to others. And they were like, no, that's, and by this time her mission is like the late 80s where things are kind of shifting. But we were definitely taught, you have got to earn it. It may not work for you if you're not a good person and you're not righteous. You've got to earn the attention. It's just so demoralizing.
And what you mean is, of course, the scripture that shows up on the cover of some of those books, which is in the Book of Mormon, that you are saved by grace after all you can do.
Yep, that's
so
it.
The interpretation of that, the strict and common and orthodox interpretation of that passage has been that first, before you get any grace, you have to do everything you can do, basically be as perfect as you can possibly be in order for you to access grace to provide the bridge for what you lack in perfection to get there. So you do have to earn it.
Mm-hmm. And what it does to you, especially as a young person, is you go, well, forget it. I can't be perfect. I can't do it, And I would look at my Baptist friends who were like, God loves me. He's in my corner. He loves me regardless. I have God on my side. And I was like, how naive. But then part of me was going, Well, that sounds kind of nice that you have somebody that is in your corner, kind of,
Yeah.
I didn't have
And then
that.
you
I had
said,
somebody that I had to earn it,
and then you said,
judging
well,
me.
Jesus is my brother. And they said,
Jesus,
burn
take
her,
the wheel. Yeah,
burn
exactly.
her.
Yeah, he never took the wheel for me. So maybe that's why I'm here today. Now, that's a great observation, RFM. Again, you should do a Home Mormonism Live on that. Excellent. So, all right. Any more thoughts on that? Bill, did you have any thoughts on that idea of grace in the past and present, or should we quickly go to our next story?
I'm good.
I
He's good.
frequently
He's
get
good.
mistaken for Jesus, I find out.
Okay, we'll go really fast. We're almost done here, but this is another article in the Wall Street Journal that just kind of swept social media. I saw it in the New York Post, some other places after they picked up what the Wall Street Journal had reported on. And I'm calling it, "Do You Look Like Jesus? You Can Make Bank." And this is a true thing. The first experience I have with this is when I was in college and a professor invited a group of us over to his house, sort of a study group kind of a thing. And it was a very nice house up on the bench in Provo. They were very well off. And I walked in and there was a giant mural of Christ sitting down surrounded by a bunch of children, and they were very distinct looking children. It wasn't just like your typical church painting. And the professor's wife said, "Oh, these are my grandchildren. I commissioned this to have this painted." They posed for it, and here they are sitting with Christ. And I remember thinking, "Oh, that's awfully presumptuous. Hopefully they will be sitting with Christ." But that was my first experience in the 80s of people wanting to have some kind of portrayal of their actual family members actually with Christ. And this is what this is about. If you can go to the next slide, this is becoming a thing. So here's some other ideas that I found on Etsy where you can, submit a picture of your loved one and you will get back a drawing of your loved one in the bosom of Christ, I guess is what it is. So if you can go to the next slide, here's another one. You can... Yeah, those are just headshots, right? And they'll put you in biblical garb and you can stand there with Jesus. Also, if you have a loved one who's departed, you can submit a picture and there's Jesus kissing grandma on the head. So,
That was the memorial.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly
In
it.
loving memory, it says.
That's what I'm saying. Grandma has passed away and you have sent in a picture and now you can picture Jesus grandma being greeted by Jesus in the next life. But as far as in Utah, about 7 years ago, this went crazy on social media. This is an engagement picture and they're walking and talking and sitting with Jesus, because we've heard that before, right? There should be a third person in your marriage and it should be Jesus.
I'm surprised he's not walking in between them.
Well, he is standing there right there. Yeah, I won't even go there. All the different things that people say about that Jesus should be in every part of your marriage, right? And so this was kind of huge, but it's kind of made a resurgence with people wanting to have family portraits with Jesus. There was one particular photographer in Utah who hired somebody, who had longer hair. She wanted to do a photo shoot with children and somebody that looked like, kind of the Good Shepherd. And when they posted these pictures, it just took off. And other people are saying, "I want that picture. I want to have my," kind of like with Santa, right? You want to, there's a fine line, Santa, Jesus, and you want to have them with. So if you go to the next
With children.
picture. Exactly. So here's an example of that. This was shared in the Wall Street Journal. There is an actor who is posing as Jesus, and there are some cute little kids dressed up in clothes of the period, and there they are. Apparently, these models that look like Jesus can make up to $200 an hour just to put on the garb and to be in the pictures. And although there was a warning on one of the photographer's site that said, if your child doesn't like posing with Santa, it can kind of be the same thing. Like you can set them on Jesus's lap and they can start, start screaming. So, but I don't know. Have you guys heard of this? Are you
Scary
intrigued
Jesus.
enough to grow your hair out? I feel
No.
like maybe both of you could do this.
I think you're right. I could be Heavenly Father at this point. At
That's
a younger
right.
age, maybe I could have passed for
Yeah.
Jesus, but now I've got to go strictly for God. So Vegas has the Elvis impersonators and Utah has the Jesus impersonators.
Yeah. And it is funny because if you think about it, there are lots of restrictions on facial hair in the church. I mean, I think they're lifting some of those, but definitely beard restrictions at BYU, things like that. And yet here's somebody that looks like Christ and you're encouraged to grow your hair. My oldest son had long hair and a beard like that. And I kept saying to him, you can go out there and make bank. I'm not kidding. You can also, I know there's somebody that is Jesus on social media, and you can send in a birthday request message and they will read that message to the birthday recipient.
Jesus does parties?
Yeah, no, yeah. It's kind of like you could open your email RFM and there would be Jesus saying, RFM, I
That is
know
so
you've been a good boy this year, right? A heartfelt message for your birthday. That sounds
well
more
done,
like
thou
Santa.
good and faithful Radio Free Mormon.
Well
You know,
done, thou good and faithful. That's right. Bill,
I
any
don't
thoughts on this?
I don't know if I'm being
Jesus?
cynical or if I don't know if it's my issue or if it's the picture, but something about it strikes me as creepy. And I can't be much more specific than that. And maybe it's just because no, I haven't heard of this before. And this seems untoward on a number of different levels. But then again, you know, when they used to take pictures of dead relatives after they passed on, I thought that was creepy too. So maybe it's me.
Yeah. They just
I'll
want
just
that
note
representation.
it might be interesting to have a wedding officiant who looks like Jesus.
Have
I
you
would
thought of
imagine-
that? Yeah.
I'm not going to grow my hair out and I got to lose a few pounds too. And I don't think Jesus walked.
Who says Jesus was skinny? You can be
well,
pudgy
we know.
Jesus.
Nobody
You gotta
knows.
look the part. You have to look like Western world American Jesus for this. to work.
Viking Jesus. Yeah, you
Yeah,
kind of
so
have to
I'm
look.
You
not
can get a
gonna pull
wig.
that off. Not gonna
Get a
pull it
wig
off.
and a corset and you're set to go.
Yep.
But
Anyway,
this
a wig
guy-
and a corset.
This guy could do it, and so I'm surprised that there isn't a Jesus wedding officiant yet, because I think somebody would pay for it.
Yep.
And
I
I
feel
can-
like there's a trend. I
if you
feel
do
like
that,
ward
I could-
parties. There's the huge demand, I think. So I decided, given this new trend, right? I'm very cutting edge. I made you guys a Christmas present. If you go to the next
thank you.
slide, I know you're gonna love this. This is perfect. There you
There
go.
it is.
There's Jesus and there's Bill on the left and RFM on the right. I thought maybe if I sent you guys copies of it, you could hang it on your mantle.
It is so funny. I would be laughing out loud right now if this were the first time I was seeing it. And the reason I know that is because the first time I saw it, I laughed out loud. I look like, I don't know, St. Francis of
Assisi, you
Saint
do.
Radio of
You
Free
do.
Mormon.
I can tell you one truth about that picture, which is all three of those guys didn't like the Pharisees or the Sadducees.
That's exactly right. I had to work really hard to generate all you guys having the right amount of fingers because AI just won't do it. But I think I got it. Just don't count too closely. So anyway, that is my Christmas present to you guys. A lovely
Thank you so
picture of you
much.
standing with
That was
Christ.
so nice.
Yeah, I think it's
Did I
great.
mention
So, Yep.
what Bill got me?
that's
very
better.
nice.
I know. I admit that's better. So I'll do better next year. I promise. So anyway, I think we're at the
I'm sure your
end.
gift will be arriving after Christmas.
After
So that-
Christmas. And if we can go really quickly to what everybody is doing, you have a huge thing coming up tomorrow night, RFM. Why don't you talk about that? This is becoming the place to be every year.
It is. And I was going to tell Bill that if he wants to go down that line of doing a Jesus wedding, I can show him the trick of how to turn water into wine, and it will really wow the yokels in Kanab.
What?
You if you're going to perform a wedding as Jesus, you should throw a miracle in. I mean,
Yeah, and that's got to be it. That's the one. That's the one
Yeah.
everybody wants.
Some
Yep.
demons out of the swine. I mean, any of that stuff would be a huge hit at a wedding.
Getting what out of this wine?
Demons, right? Or they put the demons
Oh, the
in the
demons
swine
out of
and
the
they
swine.
run over the cliff. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, the Gadarene swine.
Yeah. Yeah. Cure some lepers. Lepers are always nice to have at a wedding reception. All that.
A lot of fun at parties. Lepers, little known fact. So, you know what they call 3 lepers in a hot tub, right?
Uh-oh, here we go. What?
No, it's 1 leper. It's a leper in a hot tub. It's
Yeah.
been a long time since high school.
soup.
What do they call a leper in a hot tub? Stew.
Oh God. Okay.
Stew. That's Stew. Hey, Stew. Okay. So tomorrow night, it is upon us, Christmas Eve. The Radio Free Mormon Christmas Eve party is 2nd annual. At this point, it's going to start 6 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. You got a lot of people, a lot of famous people, a lot of people you're going to recognize showing up briefly to say hello to everybody, maybe do a trick, tell a joke, sing a song. I got no idea. Well, I do have some idea. I know what Culture is going to be doing. He's
Yeah,
going to
that's
be
gonna be
premiering his
something.
latest video.
Yep.
Which is a parody of a song that you will recognize.
Yep, I've heard it. Go Culture. It's really good. Yep, it's going to be great.
It is wonderful.
And then do you guys have Mormonism Live also on Christmas or no? I'm thinking
Ixnay
no.
on the Mormonism Live on Isthmus Cray.
Okay, but then you have Mormonism After Dark, I'm guessing, on the weekend at some point.
I will let Bill address that one.
Oh.
If RFM's up for it, we'll do Mormonism After Dark on Friday. No Mormonism Live on Wednesday. Just the 2nd annual, which will sort of take the place of Mormonism Live. It is a Radio Free Mormon special, the Radio Free Mormon Christmas Eve party tomorrow night, 6 p.m.
And of course, Bill is going to be fully involved in that, just as if it were a regular Mormonism Live episode. It's just that a year ago when I came up with the title,
You get to be
So
on
it's
the
the Radio
marquee.
Free Mormon Christmas Eve party.
That's okay. So spend your holidays with Bill and RFM. That's all we'll say. And as far as Mormonish, we do have a regular episode, but we bumped it to 5 p.m. Mountain Time because heaven forbid we should try to compete with RFM's, rockin' Christmas Eve party. It's never going to happen. So we have a little history of Christmas with Rob Lauer. It's going to be good. So I think that's great. And then
Will you be able to come on the show, on the party?
Huh?
Oh, you can't come on the party. That's
Oh,
right.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I may be
Okay.
there and I may not be there. I may send in a recorded thing. We're going to find out. And that's what I think is fun about this is that you don't know you don't even know who's going to pop in. Like anybody.
I
can
know
show
who's going to
up.
pop in. Are you kidding me?
Oh, you have it all locked down. Is that right?
Okay, I'm
Like
so
a
excited.
rando can't just show up.
No randos allowed.
Do people have to audition to get on?
This is
I get it.
RVSP. And if you don't
I
know what that
understand.
means, you can't come anyway.
I get it. All right. We have one last slide. We'll let everybody get on with it because we're just ticking down that clock to Christmas. We would like to say, if you go to the very last slide, just a very, very Merry Christmas from all of us here at the Mormon Newscast. We just wish all of you and your friends and your family and your loved ones just have a wonderful holiday, honestly. And looking forward to next year where we have all kinds of fun podcasts and things planned for everybody. And we just appreciate all of you. Go ahead and give your sentiments as we say goodbye, RFM, and then
Rebecca,
Bill. Yes.
thank you for reminding me once again what a big head I have.
Did I? I don't think I did.
Well, your hat fits on you. Bill's hat fits on him. Me, it looks like 3 sizes too small.
No, that kind of a hat is supposed to kind of sit on the top. It's not supposed to be pulled down over your eyes. It's okay. All right.
It's
Any
okay.
messages?
It's okay. You
RFM
did a
and then
great
Bill,
job.
everybody, and then we'll go.
You did a great job. And thanks, everybody. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow night. If I don't see you tomorrow night, Merry Christmas just the same.
Perfect.
Yeah. And all I'll say is Merry Christmas to all of you. I hope every one of you has the best Christmas that you've ever had. This is a lot of fun. And so thank you.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Mormon Newscast. Bye-bye.
Elder Dallin, H.O. Oaks here. First, it's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. Second, we appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Third, keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. And finally, until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast. And cheers to all the feminists, homosexuals, and so-called intellectuals.